Hi, it's Katrina. Number 10. The Trunyan Cemetery. In the traditional Balinese village of Trunyan, there is a cemetery where dead people are not actually buried. It's one of the most terrifying places you can visit on the planet, especially if you aren't used to this. The villagers don't cremate their dead. They don't burn them on a pyre or throw them in the river or leave them on a hill to be ripped apart by birds. And they don't bury them in coffins. They don't even mummify them and leave them around the village like some other cultures in Asia. Instead, they leave their dead out in the open in cages. It's called the Trunyan Cemetery, and it contains 11 bamboo cages. When somebody in the village dies, their body is wrapped in a white cloth and then placed into one of the cages. There, nature takes control. When one of these cages is full, the body that's been in there the longest will be taken out and the remains put in a pile with other ancient corpses. But we're not done with this strange and very complex ritual yet. This pile of corpses is then monitored until a certain set of bones is completely bare. Once a skeleton has lost all its flesh and fat and muscle and has nothing except shiny white bone remaining, the skull is taken and put beneath a monstrous taru menyen tree. And there you can find hundreds of skulls dating back centuries. Suffice it to say, it doesn't smell that great. Number 9. Crush by Napoleon. In 2017, archaeologists dug up a mass grave of soldiers who were defeated by Napoleon's troops back in July of 1809. The grave was discovered in Austria, underneath the topsoil of a farmer's field in a tiny town near Vienna. Underneath this seemingly innocent field were the bodies of roughly 55,000 soldiers. These soldiers perished when troops under the order of Napoleon Bonaparte came through on the warpath. They belonged to the Austrian army that fought back against Napoleon during the Battle of Wagram. The mass graves were dug in haste. The French soldiers didn't care enough to dig more than shallow pits in the ground and dump as many bodies as would fit. Archaeologists have also discovered musket balls, buttons, and thousands of random personal items that were dropped during the battle and left behind. But perhaps the biggest shock is just how unhealthy most of the soldiers were before they died in battle. Archaeologists have turned to biology, examining the bones of the soldiers to see what ailed them. Out of 50 skeletons analyzed so far, almost all of them have shown traces of scurvy from a sickening vitamin C deficiency. They all had inflammation of their joints from long marches while carrying their weapons and supplies. Plus, many of them were suffering from pneumonia infections even as they fought for their lives. It shows a pretty disturbing reality of ancient combat. These weren't battle-hardened warriors, but sickened youngsters between 16 and 30 on the verge of death even before they picked up their guns. Number 8. Evidence of a Roman crucifixion. In the United Kingdom, sometime in the 3rd or 4th century A.D., a man was crucified. He had a nail hammered through his heel bones and was left to die on a cross. Experts say he was most likely a slave, killed between the ages of 25 and 30. Judging by how thin his leg bones were, researchers presume he was chained to a wall for a significant amount of time before his crucifixion, which was a popular death penalty during that time. This is according to David Ingham with Albion Archaeology in England, who led the excavation that discovered these horrifying remains. Evidence of the crucifixion was discovered in a cemetery which contained the graves of 48 people. All of them showed signs of very hard manual labor throughout their life. This has led researchers to believe they were probably all local slaves used by the invading Romans. A workshop was also found nearby that had been used to make soap and other household items. What's truly amazing is that there have been pretty much no other examples of crucifixion found throughout Europe, probably because they were done with organic materials like wood and rope that leaves nothing behind. Only one other 100% verified example was discovered in 1968 in a tomb in Jerusalem. That makes this the second verified crucifixion, a practice that's believed to have begun with the Babylonians. It was actually used all the way up until about 1400 years ago by the Persians. They tied their victims to trees or posts, but it was the Romans who used crosses. This individual would have had his hands tied to the cross and his feet nailed to the ground. It would have been extremely difficult to breathe in such a position, and the man would have eventually suffocated. Number 7. Irish Hell Cave. In the middle of a field in Ireland is a large mound surrounded by sheep. 2,000 years ago, this mound was the site where Celtic pagans danced and chanted in a celebration which would become the birth of Halloween. The Celtic people believed the nearby Oweynagat Cave was a passage between their world and the underworld, a place infested with devils. It was here where they held the very first Samhain Festival, what we know today as the original ritual that morphed into the Halloween we know and love. Irish archaeologist Daniel Curley says the Irish Samhain Festival was not quite as child-friendly as our Halloween is now. It was instead a bloody and scary ritual in which animals were sacrificed at a massive pagan temple erected beside the Irish Hell Cave. Nobody is sure exactly how it happened, but we do know it was at the mound now surrounded by fields and sheep. People came from all over Ireland to celebrate Samhain, the ending of summer and the beginning of autumn. They celebrated with blood, food, and arranged marriages. It was also during the festival that they would make declarations of war. Not much is left of the temples and feasting grounds now, except a few pieces of crumbling stonework overgrown by grass. For the sheep to eat. Fast forward to the 1800s, the age-old tradition of Samhain, born here at the cave, was brought by Irish immigrants to the United States. From there, it turned into American Halloween. Did you know that the Irish were the true creators of Halloween in the United States? Let me know in the comments below. Number 6. Bloody medieval warfare. On July 22, 1361, the King of Denmark sent an army of over 2,500 men to the west coast of Gotland to utterly obliterate the population. Gotland is a small island about 40 miles from the Swedish mainland. It had been a major trading hub between the kingdoms of Europe and Russia for centuries. The walled town of Visby had been growing richer and richer for hundreds of years, but the King of Denmark was not too happy about all this. He didn't like that the city of Visby was becoming so rich, that its citizens were spreading into rural areas, and that it was becoming a direct threat to him and his empire. So he did what any king that felt threatened would do. He decided to destroy it. The citizens of Visby closed their gate. 1,800 peasants gathered their arms and were ready to fight against the king, Valdemar IV's army. But they were utterly annihilated. It was one of the bloodiest battles in European history. The Danish soldiers slaughtered the old and the young alike and threw their corpses into mass graves. 700 years later, these graves have been discovered. At least 4 huge pits full of medieval bones were found within what was once the walled city of Visby. The remains are ghoulish, to say the least. 1,185 human remains have been taken out of the pits so far, most of them savaged by weapons such as swords and axes. People also suffered piercing wounds from arrows and lances. They had been brutalized with morning stars, bashed to bits with huge metal spikes. Maces and warhammers had crushed helmets and skulls alike. Bodies were even found with daggers still stabbed through their skulls. What happened here was extremely shocking. Number 5. Alepotrypa Cave. The Alepotrypa Cave overlooks a quiet bay in Greece. Within this cave, archaeologists have made all kinds of amazing discoveries, including the remains of a village from the Stone Age, burials dating back 7,000 years, a small lake, and a hidden chamber in the back about as large as an amphitheater. Thousands of years ago, this cave chamber was used in some seriously spooky rituals, which perhaps could have led to the myth of Hades. Yet all of these incredible discoveries had been sealed from the world since the days of classical Greece. That is, until just recently. It was only a few years ago that Greek archaeologists managed to make their way through the mouth of the cave, where they have since discovered roughly 160 burials spanning from between 5,000 and 3,200 BC. Humans loved this cave for almost 2,000 years. The cave is like a snapshot from the dawn of European civilization. Archaeologists believe there was a large village outside of the cave, with a smaller village inside. There was definitely ritual activity, since the cave is covered in a layer of greasy ash left behind by fires. It shows that while Stone Age farmers were finally setting up their own settlements in the Mediterranean and practicing agriculture, they still clung to the ways of their cave-dwelling ancestors. They buried their dead in the dark and dank recesses of the cave, and some even preferred to live inside it. All that only came to an end because the entrance collapsed. It sealed off a small portion of history, leaving it in perfect condition for us to study today. Number 4. Extra skulls. In California, archaeologists made a very ghoulish discovery at an ancient cemetery. They uncovered physical evidence of a very macabre practice which involved community members being buried with small collections of severed heads. The excavations were done in Marsh Creek, with archaeologists digging up 8 graves that had trophy heads buried with the bodies of the deceased. By trophy heads, I'm talking about heads taken from defeated enemies and then kept as trophies by ancient warriors. In the area, archaeologists also happened to find 7 different skeletons who had had their heads removed. It's very likely that these skeletons were the victims and their heads were the trophies. But just wait 1 second, because Dr. Jelmer Eerkens from the University of California believes the skulls may have a different origin. He says maybe they weren't trophies in the traditional sense. Dr. Eerkens believes these skulls may have belonged to the buried people's mothers. He goes on to explain that taking a head in human society has always been a powerful symbol. Trophy heads were a show of power, and being buried with the skull of one's mother may have been a show of respect and great honor. Sadly, there is just no way to know for sure what happened here so long ago. Marsh Creek is home to over 500 burials dating back from between 7,000 and 3,000 years ago. Yet only 15 of the 400 were found with extra skulls in their burial plots. Number 3. Bronze Age Tomb. Romanian historians have discovered a series of Bronze Age tombs between around 3000 to 1600 BC full of bodies. 9 almost perfectly preserved tombs, thousands of years old, were uncovered at an archaeological site where the Thracians had once built a mighty city before it was taken over by the Romans. Inside these mysterious and creepy tombs, the researchers excavated bronze pieces of jewelry like bracelets and necklaces. They also found ceramic vessels unique to Bronze Age Romania. The objects prove that the local Thracians were participating in trade with societies as far away as northern Germany. The burials of the people inside also show that the Thracians may have been culturally influenced by civilizations further in the east. It's an important discovery because in Romania, there just aren't that many necropolises from the Bronze Age, which makes it tough to understand what the ancient people here were doing. What we do know is that the area around what is today Bucharest was occupied as early as 4000 BC. A group called the Monteoru settled in the hills. The Thracians eventually rose to power, and just when things were looking up, the Romans came in and destroyed everything and took all the people for their slaves. Number 2. Ancient cave remains. Archaeologists working with the University of Barcelona in Spain discovered proof of a very rare Neolithic death ritual. The proof came in the form of the remains of 4 people hidden in the back of a lonely cave. 1 adult, 1 teenager, and 2 children between the ages of 3 and 6. All 4 individuals have been dated back to 6,400 years ago. What's unusual is that all of them had been placed in fetal positions, bound together with rope, and then all 4 were wrapped in a shroud. According to Manuel Edo, the director of the excavations, they were likely left in the cave like this because it's the same position they were in when they first arrived on Earth. Other than the human remains, the archaeologists also discovered fragments of bones from goats and a calf. They also found a bone pendant beneath the elbow of the man, and what was left of a nearby bonfire. The bonfire had likely been lit during the funeral rites. These rites have never been seen anywhere else on the Iberian Peninsula before. Archaeologists don't know if it was a one-time deal, with the deceased all being strung together in a gruesome web of rope. Perhaps it was a popular way to dispose of entire dead families back when people in Spain were still living in caves. Number 1. The oldest human burial. In Africa, a spectacular yet sad discovery has been made. Spectacular because archaeologists say they've identified the oldest known human burial on the continent. Sad because the remains belong to a child that had been laid to rest in a neat grave 80,000 years ago. The child was just 3 years old at the time of death. She was placed with her legs tucked against her chest, wrapped in a shroud with her head laid gently on a pillow. She was then covered in soil and left in the earth. She was discovered by archaeologists as they excavated the floor at the mouth of the Pangaya Saidi Cave in Kenya. Looking beyond the horror of digging up a young girl's bones, this is one of the most amazing discoveries ever made in Africa. Professor of Human Evolution Michael Petraglia called it spectacular, confirming it as the oldest human burial in Africa. The professor says it's a look back at our societal behaviors at the very beginning of our species' existence. Even back then, when humans first became humans, we cared so much about one another, especially the young among us, that we took the time to respectfully bury the dead. 70,000 years before a human being ever lived in a proper house, we still had the right moral values to bury our deceased loved ones. Someone even placed the young girl's head on a pillow so that she was comfortable in her final resting place. Thanks for watching! Which of these discoveries did you like the most? Let me know in the comments below, and remember to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. See you later! Bye!